Hi everyone, it's Jessica Farrer from Holston Group. Holston Group has started a Entering the Green Tech Era series based off of our white paper, which was an in-depth investigation into the technological advancements that are preventing climate change. I am joined by Gregg Primm, the Vice President of Marketing at GRC Cooling, who have developed a revolutionary liquid immersion cooling system that is redefining data center cooling. Gregg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Jessica. Thanks for having me today. As Jessica said, my name is Gregg Primm. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for GRC, which stands for Green Revolution Cooling. We have been designing, manufacturing, and installing and delivering single-phase liquid immersion cooling systems for data centers for over 12 years. And what we've seen that's so fascinating, I think it's gonna be a big part of our conversation today, is early in our history, this was a very much a niche solution around high performance, high density, like academic supercomputing. But as we'll get into in our conversation, I'm sure, the needs of the data center have changed so dramatically over the last 5 years or so that we're seeing this rapid movement into liquid immersion cooling as a necessity in the typical data center.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to go through this today. As Gregg was saying, the main topic of conversation today really will be around the carbon footprint of data centers. As we move towards a cloud-based world, the reliance on data centers is only becoming larger, and it's said that by 2025, that will be over 100 zettabytes stored in the cloud. But as we're increasingly aware, data centers have that considerable carbon footprint and have a lot of environmental implications. And we wanted to discuss how GRC cooling are kind of minimizing this impact essentially. So to start off with, Gregg, how much of a problem is the carbon footprint of data centers?
Well, it's certainly large. It's a big problem, both for the operators and for the environment around it. So as you noted, right now it's estimated about 2% of the total world power consumption is consumed by data centers. And actually, if you look at some of the numbers released from groups like Infrastructure Masons, when you account for the entire digital infrastructure, including all the endpoints that consume that data, it's anywhere from 2.4 to 4% right now of the power being consumed by these digital data centers and the endpoints around them. And unfortunately, while there is a move towards renewable energy that is accelerating, the simple fact is, on average, 60% or more of power is still derived from fossil fuels, right? It's still burning gas or oil or coal that delivers that power in the first place. So anything that uses that much power, and that much of that power is derived from fossil fuels, necessarily and unfortunately has a massive carbon footprint. So data centers are faced with a big challenge. Obviously, the value they deliver is critical to our economies and our businesses, but we need to find ways to do it more responsibly and sustainably.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what is it in the actual data centers that's causing all of this carbon emission?
Oh, that's what's really fascinating, right? The vast majority of power consumed by any given traditional data center is just from the air cooling systems, right? So, as we know, computers eat power. When they convert that power into compute, it becomes heat, which then has to be moved away from the servers before they overheat, and then has to be rejected from the system, the data center environment. And traditionally, this has been done with basically massive air conditioning systems, right? So you have enormous cooling systems that are within the data center, air handling systems, heat rejection systems, and all the infrastructure on that, generators to ensure that those systems don't fall offline in the event of a power failure, because if they do, everything will overheat very rapidly. So just all that infrastructure that is just trying to get the heat away from the computers accounts for about half of the total power consumption of any given data center right now.
Yeah. No, it is amazing, because it's actually not that side of it that you'd necessarily always think of either, would it? So that's really interesting. And that is the area that your solution is really looking to target. So I was wondering, for the audience that's watching, how does your solution kind of help to reduce this issue?
Sure, sure. The number one thing we do, as I mentioned before, we're a single phase liquid immersion cooling system. And real briefly, the best way to describe that is rather than the systems, the servers being in an open air environment where chilled air is blown across them to pull the heat away and then rejected from the data center. Instead, the servers are immersed in a single phase coolant, which is basically boy, I'm stumbling on my words here. I'm sorry. A synthetic. I'm gonna stop. All right. So when compared with air cooling, single phase liquid immersion cooling actually takes the servers and immerses them in a synthetic hydrocarbon, an oil basically, which is far more efficient and effective at pulling heat away from systems and making the environment stable and controlled without wasting all that energy on chilling air in the first place. A way I always look at it, that I've heard described is that cooling things off with chilled air is incredibly inefficient because air just doesn't move heat away very well. If you have a bottle of champagne and it's warm, you could cool it by putting it on your dining room table and turning your AC down to about 35, or well, that's Fahrenheit, sorry, I'm in America. And then eventually that bottle would get cold. But if instead you put it in a sink full of chilled water, it becomes cold very fast and very efficiently. It's the same principle here, really.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I know the first time we kind of had this introduction, you were saying that people might be a bit put off about the idea of liquid around, obviously, data centers. But actually, that doesn't really face that much of an issue in this case.
Exactly, it doesn't. So these fluids, they're non-conductive, non-corrosive. So they don't conduct electricity at all, and they don't impact the equipment that's in them. They're very kind of a neutral environment from the equipment's perspective. And as I said, by being so efficient or moving that heat, if you convert your data center over to a liquid immersed data center model for cooling, you can eliminate all that air chilling infrastructure, which is consuming so much of the power in the first place. And you replace it with a far simpler, easier to maintain, and sustainable, ecologically friendly solution that frankly also enables higher density and higher compute load on a smaller footprint in your data center too.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And often many organizations do outsource their data center. Quite a lot of processing this day is done in the cloud. So it's not necessarily kept in, say, an organization's on site. But do you think people are still looking to calculate that in their carbon footprint and do something to minimize that as well?
I absolutely think they are. And I think they're expected to. I think that's really what we're seeing is when you look from a regulatory perspective or from organizational perspective or just from ESG policy perspective, it's well understood that simply because you offload your compute to another organization, you're not absolving yourself from responsibility for how that compute is done, right? So it's like you can't just say, well, it's over there, and even though it's delivering the benefit to my business that I need from it, the fact that it's being done in an incredibly wasteful and ecologically dangerous manner, that's not my problem. Certainly, the governments, regulatory agencies, and customers, end users really are expecting the organizations that they work with to be sustainable and ecologically responsible. So I think there's no question that organizations are looking for ways not just to have better visibility to the carbon footprint of their cloud-based services, but also in a way to report on it responsibly and honestly with their customers and the organizations, agencies around them.
No, that's really interesting that you went on to that expectation part, because I think that was one of my next questions was like, do you think it's soon going to become expectation best practice in sort of all companies' data management is to consider their impact of, the amount even that they're storing and how that end data center is being managed as well?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. What we're seeing is, carbon reporting is, I think it starts high level, right? And then we get more and more focused and more granular on it. So initially people talked about just the carbon emissions associated with power consumption as a data center measurement. But now you see metrics coming in that are incorporating things like embodied carbon. So the carbon that's actually generated to manufacture the equipment that goes into these data centers and, other aspects of sustainability. And so I think we're going to see that across the board, where carbon footprint reporting is going to be expected at every level of operations at a certain point, from the manufacturing and construction of the data center to its operation, and then also to its digital model. Like you said, the way they store data, how much data they store, and how much is that really necessary with the potential carbon output results.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. And the actual environmental impact of data centers isn't just restricted to the carbon emissions either. There is a lot of consideration around electronic waste. So electronic waste is becoming, a great concern across the board. There's, with a lot of the materials becoming scarcer, and often they are filling up landfills as they're not they have that limited recycling opportunities, quite a lot of them. And it's kind of now reached such a high amount that I was reading this article that scientists are now recommending to go mining in landfills rather than in the earth, because that would probably be quicker and more beneficial to us in the long run. But how much of a concern would you say electronic waste is from data centers?
Well, it's certainly one of the biggest concerns. So when we talk sustainability, certainly from the data center perspective, there are three primary things that we look at as far as reduction opportunities, right? So power, we've already talked about. Water use is a big concern in the data centers. We could probably touch on that later if you'd like, because a lot of that's associated with the chilling systems as well. But e-waste is a colossal issue. So any piece of equipment that goes into a data center necessarily has a finite lifespan, right? So typical data center, enterprise asset life cycles are anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So you bring this very expensive, complex piece of equipment into your data center, and then over the next 3 to 5 years, it's depreciates on a regular basis, and then is ultimately retired or removed from the data center. So anything that's part of that system that's not recyclable is going to wind up in a landfill. When you look at the scale of these operations, that's an enormous amount of equipment, right? And then on top of it, look at the infrastructure itself. As I said before, when we talk about an air-chilled data center, you've got refrigeration systems, air handling systems, plenums, generators, all these things. All of those ultimately have a finite lifespan as well. So the parts, the components of the parts, including with refrigeration, they're going to have refrigerants, which are often not particularly good for the environment and need to be captured or released in some way. These all present e-waste hazards and opportunities for improvement. And when you look at what the move to a simpler infrastructure, like when you get with single-phase liquid immersion cooling, you eliminate so much of that infrastructure altogether. So it's now no longer even a concern, right? So all the air handlers, all the chillers, all those generators no longer are even entering, are no longer even entering the life cycle of a data center. And then as an additional thing, as servers are beginning to be designed for use in a liquid immersion cooling system, they are actually simpler systems. They don't have fans. They may not have as many individual components on the board that are specifically there just to allow the servers to be cooled efficiently by air. So just by eliminating the fans, not only is there one more major component that is in every server that no longer winds up in an air in a landfill, but that actually reduces the power consumption of the server itself by anywhere from 10 to 20%. So you get additional power savings as well.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And actually, your solution is able to kind of increase the longevity, isn't it, of the infrastructure as well?
Yes, absolutely. And this is one of those things we're really trying to find good referenceable metrics to measure the impact that immersing servers in our fluids has on their lifespan, right? Because a lot of it does simply come down to, it's just conventional wisdom, right? The number one things that cause servers to fail is usually vibration, static electricity, dust buildup, things like that, that over time, these things, impact the server itself. You might get a short and then the server breaks, right? None of that applies in immersion environment. They're safely immersed within the fluids, which protects them from vibration. There obviously is no water touching them. There's no dust getting to them, no opportunity for static electricity buildup. And then on top of it, because the immersion environment thermally is so much more stable than in an air environment. And what I mean by that is that in a typical air-chilled server, there are very, very hot spots on the server where there's an enormous heat buildup, particularly around the CPU or the GPU or around the memory, right? Which that high heat has an impact on the solder points and on the board that these things are all attached to. And over time, you find you get what are called solder pops, where basically a solder point will just break because of the heating and cooling that happens around it. And again, you really remove that as a significant factor in potential server failure in an immersed environment. So there's just an enormous number of ways in which the single phase liquid immersion cooling environment, those fluids being around those servers, just contributes to longer IT lifespan.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I know you mentioned water actually earlier as well. And it's not necessarily one people would jump to essentially when thinking of data centers either, but actually your solution is able to kind of minimize water usage as well.
Absolutely. And it is one of those things that it's, I think is coming to greater awareness in the public, is that data centers consume a truly colossal amount of water. And while it's not like water just goes away, right? It's basically data centers use it largely for evaporative cooling, right, and for power generation, right? Evaporative cooling, basically you run the water through a system like a CRAC, a crack unit, and it pulls the heat up and out and evaporates into the atmosphere. The problem is, that water is consumed locally from the municipal water supply, but again, it exits as vapor where it leaves, right? And it's not necessarily going to turn into rainfall directly above the data center and fall back down, right? So it can have a huge impact on local water availability, which is a real concern, right? And certainly, with our systems, again, by eliminating the need for all that air cooling and dramatically reducing the power consumption of the data center, both of those two things are huge contributors to water consumption. I mean, right now, just here in the United States, it's estimated that the data centers throughout the US consume over 1 billion gallons of water every single day. So there's no way we can look at that and say that's not having an impact on the environment around these data centers. So without question, the opportunity to, by eliminating all that cooling infrastructure and dramatically reducing the power consumed by the data center, you can, I believe the estimate's about 800 million gallons per megawatt per year, we can reduce the water consumption by your data center.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And I know there is sort of a big discussion around the importance of water scarcity, because it does have such a circular relation to climate change. It kind of impacts it, but then is the cause of it as well, and it completely just rotates around. So that water usage is really incredible. But yeah, that was all of the questions that we have for today, but absolutely amazing, truly incredible technology, and it blows my mind even when you explain it each time. So thank you so much for going through each of these questions with me. I hope everyone who kind of watched this video did enjoy. There is also going to be a full PDF with further information available on our website as well. We'll link that in the box above. But yeah, if you'd like to find out more, feel free to get in touch and we'll see if we can find some more interesting information as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Gregg.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It was a real pleasure, and I hope to talk to you again soon.